SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. So, we have been discussing about certain interesting and important aspects of mineral economics, and in that process we were discussing about sustainability and discussed about the prospects of recycling as one of the means of sustainability as far as our mineral resources are concerned, about as far as the demand of different metals are concerned. The metals are being primarily produced in the primary cycle, and there are scopes of producing these metals which can be as a secondary production cycle from scraps, which are discarded materials, and although it's definitely not be possible to recover all the metals that have been consumed so far in different reservoirs, but there is always a hope, and more of innovative methods possibly could be found out in recovering the scraps. For example, we discussed that it is easier to recover new scraps which are being produced as waste in any fabrication, any industry using the metal, any particular technology. It also depends on the nature of technology that decides what is the quantity of scrap that will be generated, but it becomes very difficult to recover the metals in its pure form from the secondary scrap or the old scrap. We call them as old scrap. For example, take the case of an automobile, where there has been use of many different metals which has made up the automobile, and in order to get the metals in their pure form, it will definitely take more of energy to be spent on that, more of so the recovery cost of the metals from the old scrap will always be high, and but the supply of metals from the old scrap will always be dependent on the market price, and will not fix a upper limit in the quantity that could be supplied from the old scraps, whereas the quantity that will be available from the new scrap will also be limited, because after even though the price goes very high, the quantity of metals recovered from new scrap cannot be that high. So, from that just a bit of recapitulation, let us discuss another important and rather interesting aspect of mineral resource exploitation, which is also related to sustainability that we talk about. Often we ask ourselves that when a ore body is discovered, when a mineral deposit is discovered, the question is whether we should start exploiting that particular mineral resource then and there, just as and when it is discovered, or we would like to keep it sort of saved or preserve it for our future use, because we all know that mineral resources are exhaustible, and a unit mass of the ore which is taken out from its place of occurrence is lost forever, and means the mother earth is depleted by that particular amount that is being mined, and that is how the concept of the payment of royalty came up, and which we discussed before. Now, the question is we will try to answer this very basic query as to when to exploit the mineral resource. In this, there are several arguments in favor and against. So, the economic development and the timing of exploitation of mineral resources. There is a rule which is popularly known as the hoteling rule. We do not go into the detail of the calculation procedure etc., or the original idea, but roughly it states that any commodity, any exhaustible commodity like a mineral resource, its value increases with the rate of interest. Means a particular ore body whose value is x at this point of time will go on increasing at the rate of interest. So, it does not matter whether it is being, or its value does not change whether it is being exploited today or is exploited sometime in the future. So, that is the hoteling rule. So, that hoteling rule will tell that defer means we use a word, said let us say that we use a word called deferral. So, means deferring the exploitation to a future time. So, it always, so for hoteling rule in the simple way it is stated, it will always tell that the mineral deposit, the ore body could be saved for future without its value actually decreasing. However, there are arguments, and this hoteling rule sounds fallacious on many real life examples. For example, this hoteling rule, because mineral resources are a very special type of resources where there are costs, there is a high risk economic activity where there is cost which is incurred for the exploration of deposits. So, there is a discovery cost, and this discovery cost need not necessarily increase with time. There are development of new technology by which the discovery cost also could go down. So, if there are some unanticipated massive discoveries which is unrelated to the exploration expenditure, if that is which sometimes happen, will not make the ore body any or the same cost even if it is preserved for the future. So, the discovery of new deposits which adds to the stock of the unexploited resources. So, the hoteling rule would hold if the discovery cost also increases, but there are situations where the discovery cost need not increase, and any amount of any new discovery which is adding to the stock will not also increase. And the other thing which can be argued against this deferral is that if there is a technological change, that also would violate the rule, especially technology of exploitation and technology of bulk transportation. For example, we take the case of iron and copper, because the porphyry copper deposits which occur in very huge tonnage, but low grades, were initially not getting exploited because of the non availability of the technology of transportation as well as the mining. So, as and when the technological advancement took place, these deposits became used exploitable, and in such kind of situation a hoteling rule will not be appropriate, or deferral will not be favored, as we will be making it clear in our next points of discussion. So, the one of the important aspect is that whenever we talk of sustainability is that let us save the mineral resources or metallic resources, metallic or non-metallic resources for our future generation, because what we exploit today is depleted and is not available for our future generation. That is sometimes would look going in favor of deferral. But if you look at that, there are countries which make substantial progress in setting up a wide range of industrial activities, but yet to reach a mature stage, starting out with the known resource base and pleads for preserving for the future growing needs of domestic industry. For example, this would an argument which will go in favor of deferral. Let us say that there is a country, because most of our economic mineral economic analysis that we make in relation to many of the mineral producing countries is always with a history or the backup of their political setup. For example, many of the countries who were under colonial rule and they become free or they become independent, or there are many kind of coming over from some political turmoils, and then restructuring of the political system of the country, and from that everything seems to be starting from the scratches and development of many of the things from as if it is from the beginning. So, say for example, if some of the country has a substantial progress in setting up a wide range of industrial activities, but yet to reach as a mature stage, would not like to exploit its mineral resources and would like to wait and would plead for preserving for the future for the time that there is a proper structuring of the or a reach the industrial setup would reach a mature stage. But it will always go in there could be some counter arguments for such kind of arguments in favor of deferral. Say for example, sometime in the 40s, in the 30s and 40s, the iron ore in Australia, its reserve was possibly about something about 400 million tons, and the country decided, the Australian government decided or put a curb on the export of iron ore to the export of the iron ore. So, when there was no demand or no export of the iron ore, there was no much of demand for its further growth of reserve or the further growth of the resources of the particular country. So, as and when sometime during the 60s, when this policy was relaxed and the iron ore export was again allowed by the government, the further exploration activities went up to such an extent that from 400 million tons it went up to around 42 billion tons of reserve of iron. Similarly, in case of uranium in Canada, the Canadian government also decided to slow down or to put curb on the export, and but even though in the later part there were discovery of many of the rich uranium resources in Canada, but the government could not make the proper benefit out of this increased resources of very high rich, very high grade uranium ore. Similarly, the situation with Venezuela. So, this tells us that there is if there is deferral, there is actually it does not do any good, rather an exploitation of the mineral resources also helps or triggers further exploration and increase of the reserve, and that particular mineral rich country gets the full benefit out of it. So, that is the examples of the additions to reserve, the Australian iron and the Canadian uranium. There was so if the mineral resources as and when they are discovered, the exploitations also starts, the revenue that is earned through the exploitation of these mineral resources, it always helps or enhances the further exploration and addition of reserve, and the both cases in Australian iron and Canadian uranium can be taken as example, where the Australian iron story is that they could export their iron ore and get the benefit, whereas the Canadian uranium the country could not get the benefit of its full benefit of the increase in this reserve of the very high grade uranium ore. Now, in this context exactly, so the figures that was given here, that is Australian iron ore resource in the 1940s were about 400 million tons. There was an embargo on the export, and that embargo was abolished in the 70s, and then the reserve increased from 400 million tons to 17, it is now 40 to as I stated, it is about 17 billion tons of iron ore by the time it was 1987. Of course, the present figure is not available with me now. The Canadian uranium reserve also increased without the government getting the benefit of the extraordinary uranium boom of the 1970s. Now, in this context, there is a widespread misunderstanding that what should be the reserve, because whenever there is a discovery of an ore body, it is believed that a time period of about multiple of 30 concept means it should be kind of for a 30 years period of time for which the mineral reserve resource should be there, not beyond that, which also would then argue in favor of deferral or in favor of slowing down of the exploitation, but in that analysis which we have seen will not do any good to the economic growth of the country. And there are also issues or arguments which can go against the deferral. Say for example, new technology. Before the bulk transportation facility of the iron ore that are available in plenty in countries like Brazil, India, Australia that were available, the Kiruna type iron ore in Sweden was actually the major iron ore source of iron ore in Europe, and the example can be cited like this. So, by exploiting the iron resources which were available in the Kiruna type iron ore in Sweden, had that been deferred for with any of the arguments of saving for the future or any other argument or hoteling rule, then Sweden would not have been able to get the full benefit of its iron resource, because it had it kept saved for the future or deferred the exploitation of the iron resources, those resources would have been rendered as useless without any value once the huge iron ore from the banded iron ore formations in countries like Brazil, Australia or India were available and bulk transportation facilities and export were promoted all around the world. One of the other arguments in favor of deferral is for waiting for an appropriate industrial framework, the point that we were discussing about, that the country might not have reached to a proper framework for its utilization of the mineral resources. The example is taken from the Bougainville copper mine in Papua New Guinea, and the Namibian mineral resources and the Nigerian uranium are taken as example, that possibly a deferral of the mineral resources could be favored, that let us wait till the country attains a particular level of maturity in its industry and its organizational framework, its legal and many of the other things, political stability, and then only start exploiting the mineral resources. But in the ultimate analysis, that also comes out to be untrue, in the sense that even if a particular country will be in kind of a set of an unprepared state, but only if it starts the exploitation of the mineral resources, that only will have a binding on the faster or expedite the proper organization of the industrial framework and all other supportive machinery for the exploitation of these mineral resources, and the country will get the full benefit of exploitation of the mineral resources. But if it is deferred, then the growth will also be slowed down, and it will take much longer time for the particular thing to happen. For example, a maturity in this industrial framework or its political stability or other supportive machinery. Sometimes deferral in the exploitation of the mineral resources is argued for to avoid depressing mineral prices. So, this is applicable to large deposits, particularly where a price fall is expected. This example is taken from the Carajás iron ore Brazil and the Escondida copper Chile. Just before the discovery of this Escondida copper, Chile was already producing copper in huge quantity, and it was it was apprehended that if this particular mine would come into existence, then there could be a fall in the price of metal by certain amount, say some marginal decrease in the cost of the copper, because the supply will become very high at a particular point of time. So, on this situations, for example, there is a discovery of a large deposit of the size of Carajás iron ore in Brazil or the Escondida copper in Chile. One would always argue that, well, if this exploitation is deferred, then it would possibly not have that kind of a fall in the price. So, the total amount total revenue that could be earned by that particular deposit could possibly be high. But in this case also, when the proper calculation is done, and one of the important fact is that whenever there is a large deposit to be mined, it is always thought in terms of a longer period of time for exploitation, in terms of 30, 40 or 50 years. And the economic situations, for example, the price, the demand in the price or fall in the demand are always shorter terms, and when the total amount in terms of the tonnage of the total metal to be produced and marketed, when it comes, it is observed that still there is no this type of apprehensions are also not justified. Rather, it is always argued that deferral of this kind of resources would not do any good to the economy of the country. These are the two examples which could be supply. So, the price elasticity of demand. So, sometimes it is observed that the elasticity more is for supply. Sorry, the elasticity is not that with respect to supply. For example, if a particular metals supply to the world increases, it does not make the price fall immediately. That elasticity, the behavior which is studied by the metal price cyclicality and the elasticity, that is what is observed. So, under those kind of situations, one can argue that even if there are discoveries of large deposits, they should be exploited as and when they are discovered, and the apprehensions that the price will fall and the particular deposit will not be able to earn the revenue as expected is not quite justified. Sometimes there are arguments that delaying of the projects to strengthen monopoly profits. This cartelization does not last for more than 3 to 5. So, it is exactly in the context of cartelization. For example, any one particular, take the example of OPEC or take the example of International Tin Community, that was the cartel with the International Tin Association or something like that. That let's defer production of this particular metal, so that we could have the monopoly in the world market. Now, the arguments which go against such kind of deferral with the intention that a particular mineral producing country will be able to exert that monopoly is also not quite right, because of the simple reason that such kind of cartelization can only last for a very short period of time of 3 to 5 years, not more than that, because by that time the world consumers, the countries which would be looking for import of that particular metal or utilizing that particular metal in any industry, will always look for some alternatives, and this kind of monopoly will not actually be successful. So, the ground that deferral would be advisable in such kind of a situation is also not right and could be refuted. So, taking all these points, the conclusion is that the mineral for the proper return or the proper economic development from minerals, from the mineral resources, it would be advisable to exploit the mineral resources as and when, or the ore body or the mineral deposit as and when it is discovered. So, in this, so to conclude, we will just discuss, I mean these possibly will remain as histories, case histories. One cannot say that whether such kind of cases will recur in future, or but at least it is worth discussing and to pick up the points which can be taken as takeaway points for deciding or the mineral policy, the economic policy from the mineral resources. There are two contrasting cases here. One is the Bolivian tin. We all know that once upon a time the tin resources of Bolivia and the production of tin that was coming out from Bolivia was almost like 1/4 of that of the whole world. However, this small country actually never could get the economic benefit out of the tin resources, but actually on the contrary was actually had to face a crisis which is very well referred to as the Bolivian mining crisis. The little bit of a historical background for that is that the Bolivia became kind of a country after a lot of political turmoil around about sometime around 1950, when its tin resources was almost like 1/4 of that of the world. By the time it was 1985, it came to a virtual state of collapse, and this the organization which is named of the Comibol, that is in the Bolivian, it is kind of a statutory or a kind of a body which would be comparable to any public sector unit in a country like India, was given the responsibility of the management of the tin resources of this country. Now, instead of that, now what exactly happened is that many of the factors worked for the Bolivian mining crisis. One was of course the decreasing or the falling price of tin in the world market, but then a rise or a fall in the any of the metal market in the international market, the country's national economic policy or the mineral policy should be such that it should not get affected, or its kind of the economic status should not be allowed to deteriorate. Whereas what happened in Comibol was, the Comibol was more for so what was happening is that the government was not utilizing any of the revenues that is earned by the mineral, by export of the tin to any other wealth generating sector in the country. Rather, the entire earning from this export of tin was actually can be called as squandered, and was more for situations like by spending more on the salary or the other kind of comfort of the miners, and it is increasing all the revenue that is earned from this from the export of this mineral was not, or if we could put it in this way, not a single, not even a very negligible fraction of that was actually reinvested for in the mineral sector for increase for the development or for the augmentation of the reserve or increasing of the reserve or development in the quality of the production. On the contrary, with decreasing quality of the ore, the cost of production of the tin, recovery of the tin went up, and then it acted in such a way that it was a twice double disadvantage, with the tin price falling in the market as well as the cost of production of the tin as well as the recovery cost, with no developmental activity in terms of the infrastructure machinery which was all being imported. So, other than the fact that this earning that was made from the export of this tin, the rest all economy of the country depended on import. So, there was a huge imbalance between the export and import, and the economy of the country fell to such an extent that inflation went up by 400-500%. And there was also the political setup of the country, the policies, and more of authority on the Comibol to spend more on public or on the non-resource generating sector actually caused all the collapse of this particular mineral rich country. So, it is not exactly the fall in the price of tin in the international market that was not responsible for the crisis of the Bolivian mining or the virtual collapse of this Comibol, which was actually responsible for the production and the for the mining of the important metal tin in such a tin rich country. On the other hand, there is a very good success story of the country of Botswana, which is endowed with a good reserve of diamond, and it also started as a country with a very poor economy in the beginning, but by the time it was. So, what exactly is the difference? So, to appreciate that, let us look at some points that what is actually the sustainability of mineral resources. By omitting mineral depletion, the national accounts provide a distorted picture of a country's economic health. The accounts record mineral exploitation as a contribution to GDP and income, but do not record the simultaneous loss of wealth due to depletion. So, this loss of wealth due to depletion has to be very properly accounted. The environmental accounts properly constructed correct this omission by estimating the economic value of the mineral assets and the cost of depleting minerals, thus providing a more accurate assessment of economic performance and sustainable development. Because the gist of it is that whatever is being exploited is depleted. So, if it is not being replaced or some other kind of wealth is not being generated by in that process, then it will definitely lead to a virtual a situation of collapse like Bolivian mining crisis and will not be sustainable. So, sustainable development requires the depletion of mineral assets be offset by a compensating increase in other form of capital, which is actually very important. The transformation of mineral assets into other forms of capital raises two related issues. The what share of the resource rent generated by mineral extraction should be reinvested to offset the depletion, and are the investment alternative investments as productive as the mineral assets they replace. So, these are the two issues, that whatever is earned as revenue or what we call as rent from the mineral resources by utilizing in domestic industry or exporting, they have to be reinvested in the should be reinvested to offset this depletion. And what are the investment of alternatives which will be as productive as the minerals asset they replace? Definitely one of the thing is that to reinvest in the mineral sector itself to augment the reserve, and also contrary to what happened in Bolivia, that most of their the mining, the technology of the mining, the processing of the tin, the equipment, the machinery that they were using, they were all not getting properly maintained because of no part of the revenue that is earned from the mineral resources was actually spent on them, and also simultaneously it could not compete with other countries which came up with higher better technology of production of this particular metal at a lower cost and also the recovery. So, Bolivia was in the kind of a in a whirlwind, in a turbulence, facing all odds at the very same time, with its increasing, not spending any of its revenue in the mineral sector, increasing cost of production of metal, international fall in the international price, and not being able to compete with other countries in the international market. So, led to the collapse of that. So, in contrast to that, as a country, Botswana, because of its very well formulated economic policy and conversion of the mineral wealth to other type of wealth in capital investment in foreign assets, actually prospered much more. And so, in this context, sometimes it is told that actually the resource rich developing countries have performed worse economically than resource poor developing countries over the past 30 years, a phenomenon known as the resource curse. Because sometimes we ask ourselves, the mineral resources that we have, is it a boon or a curse to us? So, it actually becomes a curse, like what happened in Bolivian crisis, that the mineral resources could not be utilized in a sustainable manner. So, the government can use mineral revenues in a combination of 4 ways. One is the invest in foreign financial assets, which Botswana could do it in a very efficient way, and also spending more on the mineral sector, so that the reserve of because Botswana is primarily diamond producing, endowed with a huge resource of diamond, and the diamond resources also further increase to the reserve, and invest in infrastructure and human capital. There are other also ways like fund public consumption and which is of course not wealth generating, but still is very much required. Fund private consumption by returning some of the revenues to the citizens. So, one of the world's poor, so Botswana's case was started with one of the poorest countries in the world after independence in 1966. Botswana has done remarkably well in using its mineral wealth to transform the economy, joining the World Bank's category of upper middle income countries in the 1990s within a short period of 24 years, whereas the contrary in the Bolivian from 1950 to 1985, it came to a situation of a virtual collapse, and of course, exactly the present state of affairs is not very well known, although there are many rescue strategies built up, like inviting foreign companies to again come and invest in the mineral sector, improve the technology, and so many things. So, Botswana is an excellent model for resource rich economies escaping the resource curse through prudent macroeconomic management. It devised its own rule of thumb of reinvestment of mineral revenues to offset depletion, the sustainable budget index, which requires that all mineral revenues be reinvested. In the process, Botswana has achieved remarkable improvements in infrastructure, human capital, and the basic services supplied to its population. So, these are some of the learning things, and as basic insight into when we are studying a subject like mineral economics, to have in our mind that how a proper economic policy will make a country get the full benefit out of its mineral resources, and a faulty policy can lead to its virtual collapse. So, in this case I will just conclude with a very interesting thing, which is called the Dutch disease. So, Dutch disease is defined as the deindustrialization of the nation's economy that occurs when the discovery of a natural resource raises the value of that nation's currency, making manufactured good less competitive with other nations. So, what happened is suddenly if a particular mineral natural resource, like what it happened in the Netherlands, from the name is derived as a Dutch disease, suddenly was found to be endowed with a huge reserve of natural gas. So, if that is to be exported to the other part of the world, and huge amount of foreign currency is earned in that process, what it will do is it will make the manufacturing sector go down, and then make the manufacturing process go down. So, now what happens is, what will happen is, if that particular natural resource gets depleted, the manufacturing industry will always take more time to recover and get back to its original form, and so it will by the process of earning of huge amount of foreign currency and the manufacturing goods, it will become less competitive in the world market, and it will be increase the imports, because the nation's economy is strong. So, it would rather it becomes more beneficial for the country to import many of the other things in for the manufactured items, rather than to manufacture them in their own country, which will be more expensive. And in that case, the manufactured sector will get neglected, and there will be decreasing exports. So, this Dutch disease is actually modeled with the framework of 3 sector economy. There is the non-tradable sector, manufacturing sector, and the resource sector, with the labor being mobile across these sectors. For example, if the labor that is employed in the manufacturing sector is there is a sudden boom in the natural resource sector, the labor will move there, and it will be difficult, or it will at least take more time for the manufactured sector to again come back to its original shape, once the natural resource sector will become less prominent, or would become less significant in terms of the earning of the foreign exchange. So, it causes slowdown to the manufacturing sector that takes longer time to revive. So, with this I would like to conclude the discussion on several aspects of mineral economics, and as I have stated in the beginning, it is a very interesting, very vast topic, which could possibly merit a full lecture series like the one which we have taken up here, but it definitely constitutes a very essential component of mineral resources. And as I have said that as geologists, we do have a certain amount of responsibility, and we also do need to learn this subject well, understand the intricacies, so that we could also contribute. Thank you so much.